So on this one, we're going to be making a wine rack holder for some friends of ours who we're going to go see in a couple of weeks. On this one, Elise wanted to help out, so you'll see her come along for some of the video and you'll see her use tools probably for the first time. I can't really remember her using the miter saw before, so that'll be cool. The wine rack that we're going to be making is this simple design here. It's an angular design, very similar to the one you've seen before, like those angular wine bottle holders that I made a little bit earlier. So I'm sure you'll kind of like the way that it's designed. It's very simple. It's something you can probably replicate relatively easily with some basic tools. So if you want to see it, stick around and let's go. Okay, so my wife and I were actually moving soon, and as a result of moving, we're trying to get a few of the nicer offcuts out of the shed. And for this one, we decided we'd make this wine rack. So you can see me start out. This bit of timber, I believe it's American oak boards that have been glued together and sold as a live edge slab. It's not really live edge, they've just kind of cut a rough edge on it, but it's an offcut of another table I made. So I can't go back and check because it was like a one-time Bunnings thing. Sometimes they bring in random bits and pieces from the local area. So your guess is as good as mine. We'll start by marking out where we're going to have the bottle. So I do kind of a pattern where we just go, you know, 1, then 2, then 1, then 2, and it just kind of flows down. And I think on this one we managed to fit 10 bottles. We spaced them just wide enough that the bottles themselves are unlikely to hit each other, but close enough that they're all in a similar kind of line, so it's not going to get unstable. Here you'll see me, I'm just swapping out a blade on my miter saw. So my Milwaukee blade is got a flat kerf on it. It's quite useful when I'm trying to cut things into a surface that I want to keep as flat as possible. My fine finish blade, which is from Diablo, the Diablo blade is far better at cutting some of those fine finish. It's got very jagged teeth, however, and does not cut flat, so we'll switch that out. You'll also have seen in the background my wife Elise. So as you would have seen at the start, we are working together on this project. It is for one of her high school friends and her partner. So we're working together. I hope that this project turns out well, because I'm sure that they're going to be quite happy with it at the other end. So once everything's set up, let's start by just flushing one of those edges, getting a nice square edge ready to start out. So I believe this is the first time Elise had ever used a miter saw. If it's not the first time, at least it's the first time she's used this miter saw, and I think she did excellent. So after kind of showing her how it worked and so on, she had quite good technique. She kept that board well supported, and she was quite particular about just trying to make sure that she didn't force the saw through or kind of run it too hard. So she took her time, but the cut came out quite smooth, no safety issues, so she's doing well. So you'll notice the base here is quite narrow, and what we're doing now is we're going to figure out the kind of angle we want to set these bottles on. So if you set the bottles on like a 40-degree angle or kind of very angular way, what it's going to mean is you're not going to be able to read the bottles. If they're set that far back, however, the balance of the bottles is probably going to mean that the top is very well supported, because the cut that we're going to make shortly, the angular cut, is going to almost counterbalance itself. Very similar to those other wine bottle holders that I made, where they've got a single bottle and they don't require a base. But with the base, we set it at about a 14-degree angle, and I found this was the kind of sweet spot. This means you can still look at the bottles, you can still, especially if you're putting nice bottles, if you're trying to show off a little bit, you might want to have it so people can read these nice wines that you've got. But at the same time, you also want it so that it's unlikely to tip over and it's as stable as it possibly can be. And voila, 14 degrees kind of meets that purpose. So here we go, we've cut it, and I'll end up sitting it closer to the front, which will just then counterbalance and will be as stable as we possibly can make it. And with no word of a lie, this was the part that Elise found most fun. This is not me inflating it by any stretch of the imagination. She really just enjoyed the satisfaction of seeing the little chips get sucked up into that vacuum cleaner, so good on her. All right, so then I'll grab the jigsaw. As I said earlier, this piece was kind of designed to look like it had a live edge on it. So what I've done here is I've tried to match the angle of the opposite side that has that live edge cut into it, and then I'm just trying to cut my own live edge in to match what this board looks like. And then to do the same thing, I'm going to cut and round the top edges with that same angle. The angle's sitting anywhere between kind of 14 and about 9 degrees. It's a very shallow angle, and the jigsaw didn't really like it either, I must admit. But this will allow us to then go and sand these top corners in a way that kind of gives it more of a look of, say, a slab that was the first cut when they were sawing and milling a tree, which if you've ever seen my Instagram or anything like that, you might see that that's what I prefer to use for these wine rack holders. The first cut is usually very useless as far as woodworking is concerned. It's a very thin bit of timber, a lot of bark, and it's to allow them to then start really hooking into some flat slabs underneath. But for something like this, it's quite useful. So Elise then grabbed the center punch and all of those marked out holes. She just used center punch to locate them. And then here I've grabbed a empty wine bottle. And what I'm going to try and do is find out what is the best forstner bit for cutting the wine bottle holes. I think I ended up determining that the average wine bottle sits at about 30 millimeters. However, there's plenty of other wine bottles, particularly champagne and some other nicer wines, that they do things like they'll wax seal them, or they'll put a cage over the top, particularly with champagne, to avoid those corks from popping. At 35 millimeters, there's enough space there that some of those larger wine bottles might actually fit on this rack. It's up to you completely what you put on your wine rack, but ultimately, this gives a little bit of that flexibility for our friends who we kind of don't know their wine taste. They might be red drinkers, they might be white drinkers, they might be bubbly drinkers, I don't know. But we've given them the flexibility to put anything in their wine rack. This was task number 2 for Elise. She had a real good go with this and quite enjoyed just taking her time and getting these holes to a point where she was comfortable with them. I think she learnt pretty quickly that she could put, she can put her weight behind it, she can put her shoulder into these holes and make them go quicker, or she can just take her time and she'll eventually get them to the depth they need to be. When cutting these holes, what we've done is we will drill to about 90% of the way through where there's a little spike on the bottom of a forstner bit. We're just trying to poke that through enough that it allows you to locate that hole on the other side, and then you flip the board over and then it avoids any form of tear out. And if you're super worried about tear out, perhaps using a really expensive timber, the next step you can do past that is you can potentially put some tape on the other side, or you can use a jig and clamp it with another bit of wood so that you're not breaking through. But in this case, as you can see, once we flipped the board over, they all came out as nice and clean holes and were quite successful. Okay, so now I've chocked up in the drill just a round over bit, and this will just allow us to get all of the edges of all of those wine bottle holes rounded over. It's going to make sanding a little bit easier later on, but of course we're also trying to avoid, any nasty splinters, any of that kind of. So this is the bit that I was kind of nervous about. What we're going to do is we're going to drill 2 holes, and then we're going to put threaded inserts in the main part of the wine rack itself through to the bottom, and this is going to secure the top from the bottom. I haven't glued it because I move a lot, and I found that with these more artsy pieces, you don't often want to leave them as is. When they get boxed up, they will break or they'll become unstable. To do this, we start with I think it was a 6mm drill bit, and I'm freehanding it. You could use a drill press or other kind of drill locating tools, but in this case I just found I eyeballed it and I was very successful. I'm very glad that I was successful, but you might choose not to do so. Then we'll grab the threaded inserts. Here I'm going to use some 2-part epoxy, and this will fix those threaded inserts in. So the threaded insert, for those who haven't used them before, it's effectively like sinking a bolt into wood. So on the top there you can see I've got an Allen key locator, and then you just screw it in. Using that Allen key, it slowly digs itself under the surface. You do have to drill the hole out slightly bigger than the size of your screw. And unfortunately, if you get cheap ones, this happens. So what happened was the threaded insert snapped. I'm very, very lucky in this case that the threaded insert buried itself deep enough into the timber that all I had to do was to remove the top plate using some aggressive negotiations. And therefore, I was able to kind of save that scenario. The other threaded insert, as you can see, went in like a champ, and that's where it sits to this day. Sitting nice enough beneath the surface that it won't be bothered anyone. So now we're just going to do a quick test fit. We'll just make sure that those screws find their way home. These particular screws, they're not really screws, are they? They're bolts. They're bugle-headed bolts. These bolts had a safety feature on them, so they've got that center pin. It's not a Torx bit, it's another type of bit that escapes me. My apologies, but just mean we needed a special drill bit. Test fit went great, so we'll remove those and we'll get on to sanding. And as you can see, it comes apart in a very, very similar manner to just any piece of IKEA furniture, really. So I always put down a rubber mat before I use the sander. I find it just grips the material a bit better, and I don't have to spend so much time holding the bit down. Of course you could clamp it, but this is my method. Again, showing off that table and the vacuum attachment. Just attaches obviously to the main part of the table, and then that's my dust collection. So this is the usual, everyone knows about this part, okay? Starting with a rough grit, so in this case 80 grit sandpaper, we'll just give all surfaces a good go over. This was the part that Elise, of course, had a good part to play in, and she quite enjoyed kind of getting a nice finish on these boards. And I must admit, I don't mind handing off sanding to someone else, but just as we kind of go along, she managed to get, there was almost like a film over those project boards that I was discussing earlier, so she removed those pretty quickly, and we got into kind of sanding all of the faces. Once that was done, so those edges that we cut with the jigsaw, we're going to need to do our best to make them look a bit more live edgy. As you can also see there, I've used the router to soften the opposite edge, the bit that wasn't cut. And for this, I'll use the sander again. However, you could potentially use, I've seen a lot of people when they kind of create these faux live edges, they grab their angle grinder and they chalk up a flap disc. Flap disc is far more aggressive and can create a lot more contours, and you can be a lot kind of more natural in that tree grown look. But in this case, because I'd cut all those angles, I just really needed to soften the edges, and with some oversight from the boss, she kind of said, yep, I'm happy with the angles. Of course, at this point we're talking about the aesthetics and how it looks, and that's definitely her department. So with the approval from her, we kind of finished out sanding these parts. If there's one thing I could say about this Makita sander, is that the dust collection at the back end doesn't like staying in. I've got to figure out a better way for it to attach there. So Elise here is now going up a step, so we went up to 120 grit and then 240 grit. So if you've worked with a lot of the finishes that you can buy from your big box store before, the majority of them are quite a thick consistency, and so I tend not to go above 240 grit, and this just means that yes, you need to apply multiple passes to any of your finish, but at the same time it also means that you don't have to spend hours and hours going from 240 up to potentially 400, which at that point in time you've closed off enough of those fibers that you might not actually get a good finish into the surface. And it wouldn't be Fairbairn Furnishings without me throwing my stamp on it. This one was very effective, and we'll just use a bit of sandpaper here to remove any of the kind of the blurring effect you get when the outer surfaces burn with the stamp itself, and it comes up quite nice. I quite enjoy this part of the process, to finally see my stamp in that Peter timber. So I'm using what's left in this Feast & Watson clear varnish tub. You might see little specks on there. Some of it had tried to dry on me, and so it ended up coming out nice, but there was a couple of seconds there I was a bit worried that we were going to get some congealed finish all over this piece, but we got through it. Elise was very satisfied with that final point where you get to stand back and have a look at all of that work that you've been toiling over to get to this point, and it was quite a nice time together. And yeah, there with a couple of coats applied, we've got to a point where we can set it back up and ready to show our friends. So there it is, quite a simple design. Really like how these ones are a bit more malleable, so if you want to really have the bottles the whole way in, or you want to sit them kind of well out so you can read the labels, you get that flexibility with some of these larger holes. But at the same time, I think it was a really great project for me and my wife to spend some time together. Really great project to get rid of a nice offcut that was kind of too nice to put in the burn pile, but realistically didn't have a use for just yet. So I hope you enjoyed it as well, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.